Currently, the Chinese Navy has mobilized 100 ships together with the Coast Guard vessels and is in direct confrontation. Of course, it doesn't seem like they're trying to start a war, but rather it's a show of force. It looks like the country they're targeting is Japan. They've started to put pressure on Japan by mobilizing the largest fleet ever. Today, let's take a look at this. Let's get right into it. A Reuters report, citing regional security officials and intelligence, says China is mobilizing over 100 Navy and Coast Guard ships across the southern Yellow Sea, East China Sea, South China Sea, and the Pacific Ocean. As of 2024, the Chinese Navy has 370 vessels with 26% already deployed. This is considered their largest deployment ever. Of course, China usually conducts active military exercises at the end of each year, but such a large-scale deployment of forces is considered unusual. In December 2024, the Taiwan encirclement exercise had 90 vessels, but this time, over 100 ships were sent, making it much larger. The reason why the Chinese Navy's recent move is drawing even more attention is because it was carried out as a surprise, completely skipping the usual procedures. China usually gives advance notice to neighbors before large-scale sea exercises, but this time gave no warning or announcement. Analysts say this aims to reduce neighboring countries' response time. Reuters noted that China's maritime actions grew more aggressive after Japanese Prime Minister Kaichi mentioned possible involvement in a Taiwan contingency. As the Japanese government hinted at the possibility of being directly involved in the Taiwan issue, China is immediately expanding its naval power to put pressure on Japan, according to some interpretations. Even in Japan, this move is being received sensitively. Japan has raised its alert level as Chinese vessels have become much more active than usual in the East China Sea and the Western Pacific, and its intelligence assets are now heavily concentrated in Okinawa. Meanwhile, warnings from the Taiwanese side have become even more explicit. Chai Ming-an, Director General of Taiwan's National Security Bureau, said China has deployed 4 naval fleets in the Western Pacific. He withheld details on the vessels and missions, but noted Taiwan's intelligence agencies are monitoring them. This statement indicates China's actions are strategic pressure, not just exercises, and Taiwan also views them as more than a simple threat. This is why the view that China is targeting Japan and Taiwan simultaneously is gaining ground. As China's aim to challenge Japan's political statements overlaps with its intention to block Taiwan's independent actions, it appears that China is using the Western Pacific region as a testing ground. Its large modern operations and mobility make it hard for neighboring countries to respond. Additionally, without an official announcement, it's hard to predict when the exercises will end or how they will expand. Considering these developments, China isn't just displaying military strength but is also sending signals, warning Japan to stay out of Taiwan affairs and reminding Taiwan it can't escape China's watch. The current activities taking place in the Western Pacific are not just routine scheduled exercises, but are closer to a military demonstration that shakes up the regional order. That's understandable, since Prime Minister Fumio Kishida of Japan has not withdrawn his statement that Japan would invoke collective self-defense rights in the event of a Taiwan invasion, and he remains firm on this position. Taro Aso, Vice President of Japan's Liberal Democratic Party, recently backed intervention in a Taiwan emergency. This is easing pressure on Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, who had faced criticism for previous remarks. With Japan taking a tougher stance than expected, China is also responding firmly. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's approval rating has been rising steadily. A 3K and FNN poll showed a strong 75.2% approval rating. In Japanese politics, it is not uncommon for a new prime minister to enjoy high approval ratings at the beginning of their term, but in most cases, the support tends to decline rapidly over time. Approval ratings often fell below 50% within months of taking office. For Prime Minister Kaichi, the situation is unusual. Enthusiasm has grown stronger after taking office, rather than cooling as is typical in Japanese politics. In Japan's online space, a unique fandom is growing around Prime Minister Kaichi, especially among young people who react to his word choices, messaging style, and strong attitude. This firm performance, uncommon in earlier politicians, is now being accepted as a new leadership style. As this trend continues, some predict Prime Minister Kaichi's approval rating could climb further. Experts say the strong support base may push the Japanese government toward a more aggressive policy direction. If the support is solid, there may be a judgment that there is no reason to back down even in diplomatic and security policies. In particular, some analysts suggest that in the current phase of conflict with China, there is a high possibility that Japan will move toward taking an even tougher stance. Recently, there was an incident where the Chinese Coast Guard drove away a Japanese fishing boat near the Senkaku Islands, which are a disputed territory between Japan and China. This happened on December 2nd, according to a report by China's state-run Xinhua news agency. On December 2nd, the Japanese fishing boat, the Jieo Maru, illegally entered what China claims as its territorial waters, and the Chinese Coast Guard vessel took necessary control measures according to the law and warned the boat to leave. The issue is that the Senkaku Islands are currently under Japan's effective control, so the Chinese Coast Guard entered an area controlled by Japan and drove out a Japanese fishing boat. At the same time, Liu Dejin, spokesperson for the Chinese Coast Guard, emphasized that the Diaoyu Islands and their affiliated islets are China's inherent territory and urged Japan to immediately stop all acts of infringement and provocation in these waters. China keeps using the Senkaku Islands to pressure Japan. On November 16th, 4 armed Chinese Coast Guard vessels ignored Japanese orders to leave and entered the island's territorial waters. In addition, the conflict between Japan and China is expected to become more prolonged. Lian Jiarong, Taiwan's foreign minister, told Bloomberg Television on December 2nd that stabilization may take a year. He also stressed that escalating Taiwan conflicts benefits no one. Chinese state-run media such as the People's Daily and Xinhua News Agency have suggested that the Chinese leadership sees Prime Minister Kachi of Japan as a short-term leader with a 1 or 2 year term, and that they may be willing to endure worsened relations during that period. With rising maritime pressure from China, Japan is quickly reorganizing its Okinawa defense network. The key is developing Mage Island, a strategic southwestern Japan outpost. Once a small, remote, uninhabited island, its strategic location has drawn self-defense forces' interest for decades. After construction began in January 2023, the original plan was to proceed slowly and aim for completion by 2030. However, with tensions with China rising sharply recently, Japan has greatly accelerated the construction pace. Local reports say construction vehicles and workers are moving day and night, and as construction zones are adjusted and procedures are streamlined at the same time, some analysts say the scale of the project has grown even larger. A 2-kilometer runway is being built on Mage Shima for deploying fighter jets and transport aircraft for the Air Force. It includes joint training facilities where United States military air power can train together, hangars, ammunition depots, radar facilities, and even docking facilities for ships to support maritime operations, making it highly likely to become the central axis of the Western Pacific defense strategy. This area is close to the Japanese mainland and allows effective surveillance of China and Taiwan, making it the likely first base used if tensions in the East China Sea escalate. The Japanese government is designing this base not just as a simple deployment point, but as a core hub for its island defense strategy. If the southwestern islands are attacked, the plan is to use them as a base for rapid response units, air power refueling and maintenance, and maritime patrol aircraft operations. Another noteworthy point is that it's not only Mage Island being reinforced, Amami and Oshima in southern Kyushu are also being fortified at the same time. This area's proximity to the East China Sea, where China-Japan conflict risk is high, makes it ideal for intelligence and missile defense deployment. The axis linking Amami Oshima, Mage Island, and Okinawa Main Island is set to be the main part of Japan's southwestern defense line. Japan is now proactively reorganizing its defense network to build a new force, rather than just responding to China's maritime actions. These actions aim to boost joint operations with the United States military, forcing China to respond sensitively. In this situation, the United States has also shown a pro-Taiwan stance. President Trump signed the Taiwan Assurance Implementation Act on December 2. The Taiwan Assurance Implementation Act requires the United States State Department to review the guidelines for exchanges between the United States and Taiwan every 5 years and includes provisions to review and potentially ease the restrictions that the United States has imposed on itself. The United States cut official ties with Taiwan in 1979 to recognize China, but has kept practical exchanges with Taiwan. However, in order not to provoke China, which considers Taiwan as part of its own territory under the One China principle, the United States has set the principle of keeping contacts between the two sides private as a red line, operating under the so-called self-imposed restrictions principle. The United States is expected to openly lift federal officials' contact restrictions with Taiwan. Naturally, China reacted strongly when the bill passed. Jiang Han, spokesperson for China's Taiwan Affairs Office, called the United States' action blatant interference in China's internal affairs. He warned that the global joint statement, foundational to the One China principle and China-United States agreements, could be undermined. He sharply criticized the United States for using the Taiwan issue to pressure China. He warned the bill could prompt Taiwan independence forces to misjudge the situation and harm China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. China's foreign ministry and state media warned that if the United States crosses the red line again, China will respond accordingly. Tensions are rising and the Japan-China conflict is intensifying. What are your thoughts on the situation? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching.